Hello everyone, I'm Rainbowrat, and welcome to 2023. Now, in 2022, I only gave myself one New Year's resolution, and that was to read a chapter of a book a day. Because I used to be very into reading when I was younger, and once I got a job and started stuff, I didn't have time for it, and I wanted to get back into reading. So, I kept up with it. I actually continued to do it throughout the whole year, and I have the list of every book I read last year. I ended up reading, I think it was over 4.1 million words approximately, which is a very nice thing. So I have here for you, I'm going to tier list all of the books that I read in 2022. My idea for 2023 is that I'm going to go, instead of waiting till the end of the year, because I kind of forgot some of the books that I read at the beginning of the year. I forgot what they're about. My goal for 2023 is to do a video once every month or two discussing the books that I've read. But now I've got this. So my tier list here, let me explain it, because I didn't just go S, A, B, C, D, whatever. God tier, these are books that absolutely best thing I've ever read. Amazing. Must-read books I would recommend for anyone that likes to read the same sort of genres that I read. So, and you'll see this as I go through my books, what types of genres I read. I would recommend it to anyone that likes those books. Read Again. These are books that specifically I might not. Read Again are books that I would not recommend for everyone, but I personally want to read them again, possibly very soon, depending on how I feel. There. My shelf, these are books. Okay, so my house has two bookshelves. There's one in my room, that is just my books, and then there's one we have downstairs, that's my mom and I's books. Both of us have books on there, and there are some shelves on the bottom for my sisters. So the books that I keep on my shelf are the books that I care for the most. I mean, I let my mom and I read a lot of the same books. I let her borrow books from my shelf. I borrow her books. Like, it's fine. But the books that I'm keeping up, because I have a very small bookshelf, I don't have enough room for all my books. So the books I keep on my shelf are like top tier. I might not want to read them again anytime soon, but they have like a special place for me. The family shelf, these are books that they're not as special, they're not as like top tier, but I still want to keep them around, possibly to read again at some point in time eventually. Donate. These are books that I didn't appreciate, and I know that like my mom won't appreciate, that I am not going to want to keep, and probably next time we have a donating haul, I will probably put them in the box and get rid of them. And burn. Now, this is a special tier reserved for specifically like two books on this list. I don't think anyone needs to read these books, so they were awful. But I will get to those as we go. Note to self when editing, put this at the beginning as a disclaimer that this video has spoilers for everyone, for all of these books. So if you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video till you've read the books. So I got my list here so I can go in order, because my images didn't perfectly go in order when I was adding them. So that's fine. The first book I read in 2022, Hunted by Megan Spooner. This is kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Oh god. How can I get you small without... Okay, whatever. We're gonna... small and fine. Okay. There we go. This is gonna be a family shelf book. My mom really appreciates Beauty and the Beast stories. It was one of the better storybook retellings that I've read, but it didn't stand out too much for me as something that I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. I did like it, though. And then we've got Both Sides Now by Peyton Thomas. This was a book about a trans kid who is on the debate team in his high school, and he was going to like there we go. He was going to the like national debates or whatever, but the debate topic for that was whether transgender students should be allowed to use the bathroom that matches the gender they identify as, and he had to Are you on both sides of it? This book... Okay. Yeah, I appreciated... I liked the way the trans guy was written. I liked most of the trans part of it. However, there was a lot of things, that I didn't like about it. It wasn't a great book. There was a lot of things where, like, the main character, the trans boy, he's this, like, Irish pasty white kid, and his debate partner that he has a crush on was, I can't remember what ethnicity specifically, but he was a person of color, and his boyfriend, that was kind of the, one of the conflicts of the book, was starring in the school musical that was like some very racist musical that I can't remember, and the boyfriend was like, oh, there's no problem with this, and it ended up with like the trans guy, whatever his name is, I think it's like Finn or something, white knighting for the debate partner. It was kind of weird. It was kind of just shoehorned in there to make it seem extra progressive when it didn't entirely work great. And there was also some gross stuff with his debate rival also possibly being trans and him, like, outing them. It was not good. Okay, so then we move on to The Silver Eyes. I reread the series this year because I got The Silver Eyes when it first came out, and then I got the other two books, but I never ended up... I started to reread The Silver Eyes whenever the second one came out, and I didn't finish it. Because it is not that interesting of a book. It wasn't that interesting of a book. I am keeping it on my bookshelf just because the FNAF franchise holds a special place in my heart because I'm a nerd. But it wasn't that good of a book anyway. Which also is The Twisted Ones. The second book felt like a drug trip the entire time. The entire time it felt like a drug trip. It was weird. This is the one that felt the most like a drug trip out of the three of them, and then The Fourth Closet. Whoa, Robot Girl. Spoilers for these, by the way. Yeah. I also read 45 books, so I'm trying to speed through these a little bit, because I made a different video to go over my books that I read in 2022, and that I ended up recording that for like 2 hours, and then I hated it, and so I'm making this the day before I hope to upload it. But yeah, they're staying on my shelf because FNAF has a special place in my heart, but they're not great books. They're really boring, and the only reason I think anyone would read them is if they're already into the FNAF franchise. That's the only reason to read them, really. They're not interesting. They're very boring, and they're very weird, and they feel like a drug trip. And now we move on from that to one of my favorite series of all time, the Unwind Dystology. I love these books. This is probably the third time I've read this series, and I'm definitely going to end up rereading it again sometime in the future. I will say, I think the first one is God tier. The first one I'd say is God tier. Obviously, if you're gonna read this, so originally, I believe I read this somewhere that Neil Shusterman was originally planning to make Unwind a standalone novel, but then it was so popular that he ended up making it into an entire series. And I think you can really tell this with the second one, Unholy. Why? Don't do that. Thank you. The second one, Unholy, it really does just feel like a stepping stone between all the, like, tied up loose ends of the first novel to move on to a conflict for the second and third novels. This one definitely just feels mostly like a stepping stone kind of book. So I'm going to put this in read again for me. But the second one, obviously, if you're going to read it, I'm not assuming you're going to skip the second one. But I don't want to put them all in God tier, because Unsold is the third one in this dystology. I'd put it in must read. Unsold, yeah, this one, actually, trying to remember, yes, this one had some, I'm trying to remember where exactly, because I read them all in order, and I didn't have any days in between them where I wasn't after I finished one before the next one. So I can't remember quite where each conflict ends the book. I can't remember quite where each conflict ends, but I'd say that one's read again, and then I'd say the last one, Undivided, is absolutely a must-read. But I definitely think even if you don't plan on reading the whole series, you could read the first book and just read that because it was meant to be a standalone novel, so it does tie up the ends pretty nicely. I'd say at least try to read the first one, and the other ones are also great. But then also with this, that's the main series, but Neal Shusterman also does this thing with most of his books, his series, where he has like his extra novel at the end that's like an anthology of short stories from the universe of the book. I don't know if he does it. I know at least 2 series that he's done this with, and they're both my favorite series. But so this is that one. It's the short stories based in the universe. It's called Unbound, and this I would also put this in must read because it doesn't work as a standalone. Well, it adds enough of it, like it explains enough of the lore of the world for you to be able to read it by itself, I believe. But it also adds so much layers onto the things that are in the main series that I personally like. I always read it after the rest of them, but like it's so good. Oh my god, I love this series. Absolutely, one of my biggest recommendations. Okay, and then we move on to... Hello, where'd you go? Where did you go? Oh, are you at the top? No. One second, I'm gonna find... There it is. The next book I read was The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I've always been into Holocaust literature, and I appreciate reading the stories of people who went through that time. This is a fictional story based off of the real survivor of the Holocaust. The author, Heather Morris, she like interviewed this guy, and then she used the snippets she got from the interviews to write her story, so it is embellished off of that, but it is based in truth. I put it on the family shelf. In school, we had a literature of the Holocaust class that I took because I loved reading, and I specifically fell in love with reading Holocaust literature in middle school, and we had to read The Diary of Anne Frank. So I've read a lot of Holocaust books. There's just something about reading these people going through this awful time and still overcoming it and surviving, even through the worst circumstances, that's very inspiring. And also, if you don't teach history truthfully, you're doomed to repeat it, all that junk. So, but I put it on the family shelf because I'd cry if I kept it in my room. No. Yeah. The next one was the next series of his that I absolutely love. Now let's see if this one works. There we go. Scythe, which is also by Neal Shusterman. One of my favorite... It's the other one of my favorite... Hello. It's another one of my favorite series by him. I'm going to put the first book in must-read. I've realized last year unconsciously, or that subconsciously, Neal Shusterman is my favorite author because I have 3 or 4 of his series, and 2 of them are my absolute favorites. I don't fully have the other 2. I haven't got all the books of the other 2, but I plan to. And I didn't realize that both the Unwind Histology and the Scythe trilogy were written by him. This was the 3rd time I've read Scythe because I got the first book when it was still only 1 book before the other ones came out, and then I reread it when the second one came out so I could read the second one, and then the 3rd one came out, but this was in the time where I wasn't reading. So I've had all 3 of them, and I finally got to finish reading the entire series, which was great for me because the second one, let's see if I can find it. Hello. The second one is, there it is, Thunderhead. The second one, Thunderhead. Oh, and another thing about these covers that I love is that as you're reading, you can realize who each silhouette on the cover is. So I believe like this red one is Size Constantine, I believe is the one with the red robe, and like this is Scythe Anastasia, who you will know when you read the books, and this is Rowan. I mean, this is spoiling it if you read the books, but whatever. Thunderhead. This one has the greatest cliffhanger ending that I have ever read before. The most amazing cliffhanger ending that I've ever read, and that is why I'm surprised that it took me so long to read the third book, because I literally read it and I was like, what the fuck, that can't be the ending, where's the third book? So I'm surprised it took me so long to read the third book, because this was amazing. I'm trying to decide. I only want to put like one book of every series in God tier if I want it in God tier. I'm gonna put the third one actually. I'm gonna put that in must read. And The Toll. This is the last book in the series. So this is the one that took me too long to read, or too long to get to reading, even though it was amazing and I should have read it sooner. I'm putting it in God tier because it fixed all of the what did I say it was? Not plot twist, what's the word? The word for the endings is cliffhanger. Cliffhanger, that's what it was. It ties up the cliffhanger endings so amazingly. There's so much new conflict, and it works all these new characters in perfectly. Works out, and the ending I would never have expected from the first two books, but it still worked perfectly. It wasn't the kind of ending where it's like, haha, you were wrong. It wasn't the type of ending where it's like, haha, you were wrong. You couldn't even imagine this plot twist. It sets it up in the book, and you can kind of start to piece together what's going to happen throughout the book. But by the time you get to the end, you're still like, oh my god, this is amazing. I never would have expected this to happen. It was so good. So that going in God tier, it was amazing. And there was a gender fluid pirate added in, which, one of my favorite characters. Absolutely amazing. And then we go on to the Song of Achilles. This is a book by Madeline Miller. It is based off of, it is like a retelling of the Greek mythology of Achilles and Patroclus. I'm putting it on the family shelf. I've never been one for romance books. That's not generally the type of genre that I read. Like, I will read it, but it's not generally my favorite, and usually if I read it, it's gay because I'm queer. Anyway, the Song of Achilles, it was very good. I love Greek mythology. It was very good in that respect, but there was one part where there was like, Achilles had hidden on an island, like a small island kingdom, to hide away from the war or whatever, and to be allowed to hide there, the king was like, okay, you can hide here as long as you marry my daughter. And so there's this whole thing where he was kind of like forced to have sex with his daughter, with the princess, and he didn't want to because he's a little bit gay. And then Patroclus comes to look for him, and the princess is like, your friend, he doesn't like me, like, he doesn't find me attractive or anything. And Patroclus is like, aw, man, he doesn't. And then Patroclus kind of, it forces himself very uncomfortably to have sex with the princess. And it's very obvious that he is not enjoying it and that he does not want to because he is gay. So that was a very uncomfortable part to read, and that is one of the things that sticks out the most to me out of the book, which is bad. So that's why it's not much higher. Okay, that's all. We got through my first page and it took 20 minutes. Oh, good. Good. That worked. Sounds good. The next one that I read was... where to go? Where did it go? There's the second one. Oh, here it is. What If It's Us? This book, I have read it before last year, but I read it last year too. The only reason that I reread it last year was because I found the sequel to it. I didn't know there was a sequel to it, but my friends and I went to Half Price Books, and I was like, hey, that's the sequel to that book that I hated. I hate the ending of this book. The first time I read it, I identified very strongly with one of the characters, the one who kind of gets his heart broken, and so I hated the ending, and I wanted to throw the book away, but I did not. And then I found the sequel, and I was like, hey, I wonder if this fixes everything. And so I decided to give it a chance again, and this time when I read it, I was like, oh, I identify more with the other character now, who is the one that kind of does end up breaking his heart, but it wasn't entirely on purpose. And I'm like, oh, now I can see it with two perspectives. So it's going on my shelf, but that's also mostly boosted by the second one, Here's to Us, also by them. Or it's the sequel. This one fixes everything. It fixes everything. I would not read it again, or at least I'm not planning to read it again anytime soon, specifically because I would have to read the first one again, and I don't like the end of the first one. But the second one, I think it builds up nicely to fix the ending of the first one, but also it wasn't great. It was kind of mid-tier, like, it wasn't great. It was better than some other things I've read, but not the best thing I read, you know. But it's not terrible. And then I've got, if I can find it. Here it is. I also grabbed Mouse whenever this was a big thing about, whenever it was getting banned from that one school and everyone was like freaking out about it. I bought it and then I read it. I didn't realize there was two books, so I only got the first one. I'd put it in must read. It was a very good book, and it opens up the conversation of Holocaust survival and the descendants of Holocaust survivors a lot easier for people who aren't into reading the like dark, gritty details of all this torture and such that the people have gone through, because it's in this comic form of the son of the survivor. It kind of opens it up, and it opens up this like generational trauma that goes on from the descendants of the survivors because of their parents or whatever, or their relatives or whatever, not being able to be as open or having all this trauma from the experiences they went through. So it kind of opens up that discussion a bit. I liked it a lot. The next one was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This had so much potential to be like a really cool, like, not demonic, but like magic book or like adventure kind of thing. And it was a very kind of shitty romance. So I don't think my mom even liked it. I think I'm putting this one in donate. I didn't like it. I'm not a romance person. I'm not a romance person, and this was very much a romance book, and I thought that it would be different than it was, but I guess that's my own fault for putting expectations on it. But there was like this whole setup with this like dark, ancient god who answers her after dark to grant her wishes, and he does it in like this genie way where it kind of blows up in her face, and he's like, I'm gonna eat your soul. And then I would have liked to see more of the story of her and this god getting to know each other, because like there are some parts, like some chapters where it is going into the past and it's her relationship with this dark god going like growing and such, but then it always snaps back to the present where it's her and the one guy that can remember her, and it's kind of, it's like, I feel like definitely the only reason they're even together is because he's the only one that can remember her, and she just latches onto that. I like the idea of the enemies to lovers aspect, and there was this kind of very interesting story of, like, in the past you could tell something had happened where she did become lovers with the ancient god for some reason for some amount of time, but they only kind of hint at it and, like, be like, ooh, a backstory, and then they don't actually. I would have liked that story more than the story that it ended up with. That's another one. Where'd it go? I gotta find it. There it is. be drag fabulous. This wasn't like a traditional novel, it's just like a very short book with some things about how to love yourself and have cool style and such. Like the drag queens in the book. But I liked it. I put it on my shelf. It's just a short little thing. It's nothing like super amazing, but it was cool, and it's good to have some positive affirmations for yourself sometimes. And now we go on to The Half Child by Kathleen Hersom. Now, this is a book that I originally found in middle school. It's probably one of the lowest grade novels, or like lowest reading level grade books that I did read last year. But I'm absolutely putting it on my read again list because the whole story is that it's this little girl in like a long time ago in Ireland, and she has a younger sister who has like trouble speaking and behaves oddly and is believed to be changeling sent by the Fae. And when I first found this book, my middle sister was a toddler, I believe, and she had very delayed speech, and she also had very odd ways of like behaving and such. So I connected very hard with the main character in this book, and I just love this book. It brings me back to that sort of time in childhood where I was like one of the only ones that could understand my sister, and it was great. It meant a lot to me. Now, It Devours. I was excited to read this book because I love Welcome to Night Vale. I'm not much of a podcast person though, so I've never been able to finish the podcast. But I was really excited to read the book because I love the podcast, the amount of it that I did read. However, the book, I'm putting it on my shelf because Welcome to Night Vale holds a special place in my heart. But the book itself was kind of boring. It was kind of boring. It leaned very hard into this romance part more than it leaned into the romance part more than the giant worm god that was eating Night Vale. I didn't like it. The comedy of Welcome to Night Vale, the absurdity of it didn't translate great into the writing, if that makes sense. Like, it was there, but it didn't translate in the same like comedy of the book, of the podcast. And I don't know if that's because it wasn't in Cecil's velvety voice or whatever, but I didn't like it. And then we've got, I can find it, Into the Pit. I got a few Fazbear Frights books for Easter, and so I wanted to read them. This is, again, I would place this above the Silver Eyes in terms of writing quality because it's just short stories. That's just short horror stories, and they go well. But it's going on my shelf because it's FNAF. I am gonna read them again because I only read the first two. I had the first two. So I guess I will put them there. I got the first two, and then I just got 4 through 6 for Christmas. I need to find 3 before I can read them again. But it is nice to have little snippets. They're nice little short stories, but you could read them without being into FNAF and knowing like the lore of FNAF, and just have these weird things, these weird like little short stories. Time Traveling Ball Pit. Yeah. Okay, so then we've got Hottest Blood. So the story behind me getting this one is that my library was having a sale where you got like a big bag and you were able to fill it with books for like $2 and take all the books. And I paid the $2 and I got the bag, and then like all the books were the kind of things I don't enjoy reading, like James Patterson, Assassin, Mafia, Sex Dude, so detective, whatever. Or there was an entire section that was basically white middle-aged man self-inserts about saving President John F. Kennedy. Specifically, there was an entire section of those books. And so I saw this book, and I thought this person on the cover, I was like, oh look, it's a demon twink. I want to read this book. And then I realized halfway through the book that I'm pretty sure that person on the front cover is supposed to be a girl, not a twink. I did appreciate some of the stories. This book is also almost a decade older than I am, which is interesting because it was an entirely different time. There was one of the stories where the horror part of it was that the guy was being given AIDS by a girl who was hired by his ex that he cheated on. I didn't catch that the horror part of it was AIDS until a little bit almost the end of the story, because I grew up, by the time I was growing up, AIDS wasn't as big of a epidemic. It was kind of like it still existed, but there were already medicines to like hinder it and such. So I'm gonna put it in donate. I don't think I'm gonna keep this book. It's interesting to read, but I don't think I'd read it more than once. And then we're on to Gerald's Game. I got this book because at the same book sale, because my friends and I had watched the movie on Netflix. I hate reading Stephen King. I hate reading Stephen King. I've read like 3 or 4 of his books now, and I hate reading Stephen King. And this book, the juxtaposition, it was so boring for so much of it. This is the longest book it took me to read last year. It took me over a month to read this book. It was bad. It took me over a month to read the book, and I did not enjoy a second of it. I think the only part of it that I was like, oh, actually into it was when she was degloving herself to get out of the handcuff, and then it dragged on for so long after that also. I hated that book so much. But now we're going on to Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. It's like Harry Potter, but gay, with a vampire roommate, and also actually a good book. God tier. Absolutely loved Carry On. I got a sequel for Christmas, except I got the 3rd one, so now I have to find the 2nd one before I can reread it. Absolutely loved that book. God tier. Fangirl, also by Rainbow Rowell. I did not appreciate this one as much. Definitely not going to say it's because it was a straight romance. I don't think my mom liked it either, but I'm putting it here. It was a book. I didn't appreciate it very much. So that's that. Now we're going on to Satan's Petting Zoo. Now, I bought this at Steel City Con from the authors, and I have a signed copy. But, having said that, burning it. This was an absolutely terrible book. I hated every second of reading it. I didn't realize when I bought it, it's kind of my fault, because I didn't realize when I bought it that it is an adult fiction novel. I'm not into adult fiction. It felt like it was written by a 12-year-old who just discovered what boobs are. Because anytime any single female character showed up for 5 seconds, it felt like they had to point out her breast size, even when it was the main character's best friend's mom's, or just a random girl he finds in a cafe. It was very uncomfortable. And then there was also the main character's name was Chad. The main character's name was Chad, and he was not a jock. There just aren't non-jocks that are named Chad. And also, to go along with this, I also got the sequel, because they were both there, and it was just as bad, but I forced myself to read it because I was like, maybe there's a chance it gets better, and then it did not. The only word I have to describe this second novel is the only word I have to describe this second novel is where an enemy. Where see an enemy. That is all. So anyway, now on to another book. As this tends to go by now, I believe you would know. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Absolutely one of my favorite books. This is probably the third or fourth time that I've read it, and the first time I've read it without crying. It's also the first time I read it since I went on testosterone, so maybe that has to do with it. But absolutely must read if you like this genre of books. Absolutely amazing book. Yes, it does spoil it at the beginning, but they both die at the end. They do both die at the end. But it's not so much about that as it is the story of these two people who know they're going to die, coming together and just kind of, it's them coming together and learning to trust each other in this one day that they have left. They have no idea how many hours they have left, just that it's within that day. And it kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat. Even knowing how they die at the end, it still kept me on the edge of my seat waiting for it to happen, knowing when it was going to happen. Yeah. And I am so excited because I got the prequel to this book this year, or I got the prequel to this book for Christmas. My mom just gives me books for Christmas, and I love it. So I'm absolutely going to be reading it next year to read the prequel for it. I know that they're not in the prequel, it's different characters, but I'm excited to be in this. I'm excited to see Adam Silvera write these characters, and I hope it ends up more like this one, and not like What If It's Us. To be fair, What If It's Us was him and Becky Albertalli, who was the person who wrote Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. I read that one when it was popular and there was that movie coming out for it, but that was a long time ago, and I don't remember liking it that much. And then I have the second one, The Upside of Unrequited or whatever, but I couldn't get into that one, so I didn't actually read it, and that was years ago. So I might try reading that again, because I still have it, I believe, but I'm not a huge fan of Becky Albertalli's writing, but Adam Silvera by himself I like a lot. And then, onward, let's keep going. Woo. We All Looked Up by Tommy Wallich. This book was interesting. I didn't quite like it though. I would donate this book. It's interesting to read because the whole thing is kind of like there's this asteroid coming and humanity there's like a 2/3 chance of it hitting the Earth and destroying all of humanity. But I didn't like the characters. I only remember like two of their names, Anita and Eliza. The characters all were very one-dimensional, and then they did have some character growth, but it was still very one-dimensional character growth, if that even makes sense. I didn't like that book very much. And then Children of Blood and Bone. I don't know if the sequel of this book is out yet, but it needs to be. I could not put this book down, and it is a large book, and I think I finished it pretty fast because it was amazing. I loved every second of it. It is the best enemies to lovers storyline that I've ever read, because the enemy actually, he gets knocked down, like he doesn't have power over her, and that he loses his power over her, and then he also like remorses for the bad actions that he did and realizes what he did was wrong, and he actually has a character arc where he actually grows and becomes a good person before it even steps into the line of lovers, which is great. I absolutely loved it. I need to read the second one. Okay. And then I read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It was Halloween. I wanted to read some short, scary stories. So, it's exactly what it says it is. Short, scary stories. And the same is true of more scary stories. I'm being terrible at cropping these. More Scary Stories and Scary Stories 3. I have the trilogy. I read all three of them. I mean, they're short, scary stories that I've already read before. It wasn't that big of a thing. Monster Call. Wait. Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This book, I'm putting it in the must-read category. I loved reading it. I read it around October also. I was like, ooh, there's monster in the title. It's gotta be a good October book. And then I was hit with cancer, and this kid having to admit that he doesn't want his mom to die, but he just wants her suffering to be over, and his suffering by extension. I mean, that kind of spoils the whole end of the book. Sorry. I'm gonna, put a disclaimer. Note to self when editing. Put this at the beginning as a disclaimer that this video has spoilers for everyone. For all of these books. So if you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video till you've read the books. Anyway, yeah, I absolutely loved that book. It was amazing. I believe it made me cry, which is hard for books to do nowadays. So that's very cool. And then we've got Spellbook of the Lost and Found. This was a book. It sure was. I put it here. It was an interesting book. There was a lot of characters, and there was this love dodecahedron going on. It was love pentagon, love pentagram. It was some sort of shape with 5 corners, but 2 of the corners don't touch. It's almost all of the lines interconnect, except 2 of the corners don't touch because it's a twin brother and sister, and they don't have that. But then also one of the girls ends up being their half-sister as well, and that's weird, because she's in love with, both of them. And then there was this whole, B-plot with 4 more characters that also ended up being, time travel-y, and it was actually in the past, but then one of the girls kind of shows up in the present, but then she goes back to the past, and it's all fine. But I predicted this, long before it actually was, said in the book that there was this timey-wimey junk. But I predicted it, and I was like, there's no way, this can't be that type of book, there's no sci-fi here. Well, I guess it's fantasy, kind of. It was weird. It wasn't bad, but it was weird. And then we're not done yet, because Gleanings. This was the last book for the Arc of a Scythe series, and this came out, I saw whenever I reread the stories earlier in the year that this book was coming out on my birthday, and I was like, for my birthday, I really want this book. I don't know if it'd be here on time, but if you could pre-order or something. I was it was spring. I never have ideas for my mom for what to get me for any presents. She hates it. So I was like, listen, I never have ideas for what I want for presents. I'm giving you the idea now. I want this book. And it was absolutely amazing. Must read. I put all of this aside. I'll put it in read again. It doesn't make much sense if you haven't read the trilogy itself. It doesn't stand alone as well as Unbound does. It might. A lot of it, I feel like the short story is tied into the main story a lot more than than Unbound did with the Unwind Histology. Unbound kind of explained in itself the idea of the world, so it fit itself without needing the background information, so you could read by itself. Gleanings, I don't feel like it explained the workings of the world as well as Unbounded, but I still appreciate it. I still loved it. It was amazing. And if you read the Scythe trilogy, the Arc of Scythe trilogy, I believe you should read Gleanings as well, because it's amazing and I loved it. Okay, and then I read The Lovely Bones. I believe I accidentally stole this from one of my teachers a long time ago because I saw her name in the cover of it. And you know what? I shouldn't have, because it was not a good book. It was weird. it was strange. So it's about like this little girl that was like murdered, and she's watching from heaven as her friends and family grow up without her. And there's kind of this weird obsession with watching her killer get away with murder. And then like has this obsession with watching him as he like as he's throwing away her body and like hiding it, and then as he tries to become friends with her dad for some reason. And then, like, it keeps going until he escapes. And she's like, yeah. I think she does kill him eventually. At the very end, she, like, kills him. But he did get away with murdering her. But there's this weird sequence towards the end where one of her friends, who has, like, become very morbid and has been, like, feeling like she could feel her watching her, somehow opens up her body for this little girl, Susie, to, like, possess her. And then she possesses this living girl, and then she fucks her crush from school. And then she doesn't, like, call her sister or her family or anything, let them know that she's, like, in heaven and happy. And then she goes back to heaven, and the other girl comes back, and it's fine. Also, the other girl is, like, heavily implied to be a lesbian, but sleeping with this crush just because he's a body. And so it was very weird, and there wasn't much of a plot. It was kind of just people watching, but boring. So I didn't like that one very much. And now we've got a book that I can't find. There it is. The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I don't know who Ruth Ware is, but she loves, I don't know who Ruth Ware is, but she loves herself some, what's it called? Not archaeology, not carpentry, building design. Architecture. He loves architecture because I'm pretty sure 90% of this book was describing the house and the architecture of the house in ways that I would never notice of any house that I've gone into ever. Also, the end. There is a huge plot hole in how she is being found guilty and such. Because oh no, the one little girl pushes out the other little girl from the window in the babysitter's bedroom, but the babysitter had put a sock over the camera in her bedroom on her first day, because of course you would. A grown-ass woman doesn't want a camera in her bedroom. But the thing is that she was their like handyman had like a separate like garage house off the house. So the thing is that the cameras would have seen her leaving the house to go over to his house to fuck him. And then they would have seen her coming back after after they saw the children go into her room from the hallway camera, and only one of the children come out of the room from the hallway camera. The entire house had cameras everywhere. This would have been proven even without the camera in the babysitter's room. Like, they wouldn't be able to prove that the child pushed the other child, but they would have been able to prove that whatever the fuck her name was, wasn't there whenever the child was pushed out of the room. Like, that was a huge plot hole, and it ruined the ending for me. Also, the fact that they set up this whole ghost story the entire time, and there are absolutely no ghosts, and it's explained away in the last, like, 50 pages. I hated it. Where was I? Ooh, this was a good one. Here's a good one. The Witchery. This is a debut novel by S. Isabel. I loved this book. I wouldn't put it God tier. I put it in must read. The thing about this book is that there was a lot of characters, which was a little bit much to grasp for the first novel. It did set up a sequel, so I'm excited to see the characters come back for a sequel. I liked it. It was a little bit odd, but it was a nice fresh read from a new author. I liked it a lot. And then I'm coming up on my last 3 books, because the last books that I read were the Hunger Games trilogy. These are the last books that I read for last year. I it was like the last 2 weeks of the year, and I was like, I'm gonna read these books because I know I could finish them in the last 2 weeks, and I could also pace myself with them. And usually, when I was younger, anytime I was in a reading slump, I would come back into reading by reading The Hunger Games. Now, the first book, or whenever I started reading them, I realized the reading level was a lot lower than I remembered for them. The writing was very much simpler than I remembered, but they're still pretty good. I'm gonna put them. I mean, everyone's read The Hunger Games. Not everyone's read The Hunger Games, but everyone knows of The Hunger Games. I put the first one on my shelf. Catching Fire. Actually, wait. Let me move that. I'm gonna put The Hunger Games on read again. Catching Fire, out of the 3 books, is the one that I would call most a romance book, if I had to say any of them were a romance book. Not that any of them are. They're not romance books, but Catching Fire is probably the mid. I don't like that one as much. And then there's this Mockingjay. The third one, the last one. I don't have of Songbirds and Snakes, or whatever it's called, of Snakes and Songbirds, whatever, but I want to get it so I can read it. But I'd say out of these 3, Mockingjay, I'd put it in God tier. Specifically because of the way it writes Katniss being, like, so... This is the first time I've read these books since I became older than Katniss. When I first read these books, I was under 16. I can't remember how old exactly, but I was under 16. So I read these books and I was like, wow, she's such a cool, like, adult, and she's doing all these cool things like an adult. And now I'm reading these and I'm 20 years old, and I'm like, oh my god, this poor child needs so much therapy. And the writing in this last book specifically, I believe it, like, brings forward all this trauma from her, and it shows her as this broken shell of a person trying to hold together for the sake of this war and her family, and it shows her getting closer to her sister again, opening herself up after being through all this horrible trauma that she's gone through, and then showing how angry she is at, like, being used by all the sides of the war. She's just being used constantly, and she's like, I'm just a kid. And then the ending, after Prim dies, I noticed this time that the writing goes from the normal way it is to the just short, choppy sentences. Like, every sentence has a struggle for Katniss, because it's told from Katniss's point of view. So it's like every sentence is a struggle for Katniss to even, like, think, because she is so overcome with grief at everything that's happened, when she goes mute for, like, weeks because of the trauma, and it hits so good. The only thing I didn't appreciate was I felt like it was out of character for her to vote to make one final Hunger Games at the end, but then she immediately kills President Snow yeah. So it's fine. Not President Snow, President Coin, that's what it was. Yeah, and that was the last book that I read, and it did make me cry when Prim died again. I was surprised because I didn't cry at some of the other books that usually make me cry. But this is my tier list for all of the books that I read last year. I think it's very much towards the middle. A lot of them skew towards the middle which is fine. I mean, not every book's gonna be, like, the best thing I've ever read, and not every book's gonna be absolutely terrible. I try to avoid books that I know I'm not gonna like to read. Generally, I like to avoid books that I know I'm not going to read that I'm not going to enjoy reading, because I think reading should be a fun thing. I do try to step out of my comfort zone every once in a while, such as with Gerald's game, but it doesn't work out all the time. But yeah, this is my list. I like my idea. The other thing is that I'm planning this year, instead of just writing down, like, I have my list of all of my list was all, it was the titles, the authors, and then an approximate word count found online. So, like I said, I read over 4.1 million words. My only goals for reading this year are I want to try to pass 5 million words, which I believe I could do. I want to... And I want to find, for every book, I want to see if I can find some, like, discussion questions or whatever, and actually analyze the books a bit more, rather than just reading them and immediately going on to the next book. I want to actually, like, think about them a little bit more when I read them. If that's a thing I can do for all the books. It might not be a thing for all the books, but we'll try. And like I said, either sometime every 1 to 3 months, I want to do like a recap of all the books I've read for that amount of time. I don't know if it would be every month because that might only be like 3 books or whatever. But so yeah, that's here actually. But this is the distribution of my books. The bottom is the amount of days it took me to read. Most books took me around this like 5 to 10. Definitely all of them, most of them took under 15 days for me to read. The only outliers to that were Mayhem Menagerie, that's the second book from the series that I hated, and Gerald's Game, which took me over a month to complete. That says 30 there, it's a little bit small and hard to see. But most of them were here. The book with the most words that I read was The Toll. I can't remember. That was the last book for the Ark of a Scythe series, and that had about 186,000 words, so that was the one with the most words that I read. But it is interesting to see, you can kind of see a slight thing. Here's the weird thing, in school they tried to make me take AP Statistics, and I didn't sign up for it, so I left the class. I didn't cut the class, but I went to guidance and made them take the class off my schedule because I didn't want it. And now here I am doing statistics for no reason except for that I wanted to. I started making this very early last year, and I'm going to make another one for this year. I also did one with the fanfiction I read, but that's not for you guys. That's for me, specifically only me to look at and enjoy. But I'm going to make another one of these. Hopefully I don't have this big of an outlier over here, so I can actually read the books. But it's very interesting. I have this whole list of, and I kind of color-coded it with which month it was that I read it, and like books that were in between months, where I started them in one month and ended them in a different month, were the in-between colors. So it's very funny because the only purple one here, well, not the only one, but like blue was June, and then was it June? Yeah, because then I think Gerald's Game I read throughout July, and then it took like the whole time. It took 33 days. I don't even know if you can see this because of the way. Yeah, you can see the end of it. Not important. I might end up cutting this part. But that is all that I have for you today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.